Pauline Buisch. It is so good to see you. I can't remember your maiden name.
Paris.
Oh, maybe I never knew that because my niece married a Paris. Maybe I didn't even know that.
Okay. Yes. Pauline
Buisch. So when I first met you, you were married to Jonathan.
Yes.
Okay. Well, everybody, this is Pauline Buisch, and Jonathan Buisch is out the other door and is unable to join us today. But I am so pleased to be with Pauline, who is the first person that I've had a chance to talk with about longing to know from my wonderful years at Redeemer Seminary in Dallas, Texas, where Pauline was a stellar student of mine and other people. And Pauline is now Dr. Pauline Buisch with her doctorate from Notre Dame in ancient Near East studies and looking to start her first faculty position this fall. So welcome to you. It is so great to see you.
It's such a joy to see you and be together in this way again and to think about that time together and this book with you. And so thank you. I'm so glad.
Well, you're so welcome. And I know that you, because I asked you to, went back and looked through Longing to Know. And I'm sure I had a class that you read Longing to Know in.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So my first question is to tell your part in the Longing to Know story. Like in what context did you read it and what it was like for you to read it and how it changed your life?
Happily, we'll talk about these things. So I think this was my last year in seminary. So I was getting my MDiv at Redeemer. And you came to teach apologetics. So it was in the context of our apologetics requirement that I first encountered Longing to Know. And I somehow managed to get through college and a master's and had never taken a course on philosophy, which is just shocking to me now to really think about. So it was a new experience. And, but I remember in reading the book, so much of it rang true to me in my experience as a musician. And I studied vocal performance in college, studied the piano through college, was a performer.
I had forgotten that part of you, Pauline.
Yes, well, I forget that part of me too sometimes these days. But that was such a just the way you describe coming to know rang so true to me in that important part of my life that made so much sense. So the idea of subsidiary focal integration. Knowing being an active human effort. So I need to come back to this, but so it rang so true to me in my experience, primarily as I was thinking about my experience as a musician. And then it also helped me see how I really was a product of Western philosophical tradition that I hadn't necessarily reflected on yet. But what I thought knowing meant. Knowing being this idea of a success word, as you say, and a sort of conquering or acquiring of a static object, knowledge being this external nugget the static nugget I can pick up and put in my basket. So realizing I kind of had this disconnect in that's not, though, how I experienced the most meaningful parts of my life. And yet that is still how I conceived of what it meant to know. And so it was fascinating for me to then think about, because I actually went and I've got my little page of notes that I had stuck in the book, just jotting down quick things, from 8 years ago now. No longer than that, 10 years ago now.
I think I would have met you in 2011 when I first came. Is that true or not?
No, that is true. So that's right, 12 years ago.
Wow.
Yes. Wow. So, and it's so fascinating. The notes I was taking down are things about remembering, vocal lessons of, you stop and analyze the larynx and the diaphragm, and you're so in touch with all these subsidiary things. And then, but the whole point is then you have to push through and sing and you have to focus and communicate. And if all of a sudden you start thinking about these other things that, things change and you can't focus, but then you still have to break down and master these other things. It's interesting. I also had a note of remembering the whole, just your emphasis on knowing is a bodily experience. It's not something that only my brain interacts with. And, but this is a funny memory, but I remember being a teenager. I tap danced as a kid. And I remember being a teenager laying in bed at night, going over in my head, a part of a routine that I had been stumbling over. And I kept going over it in my head over and over and over again, because I kept stumbling on that spot in my head. Like as I thought through the physical motions, I tripped up in my head the same way I tripped up in my body. And it wasn't until I could think through it in my head and perform it correctly in my imagination, so to speak,
Wow.
that I was able to do it in my body.
Wow.
But that's to say, so much of this idea of knowing, longing to know, this experience of knowing, meant so much sense to me as I reflected on how I had come to know some of the most important things in my life. But I just sort of categorized that as, that's how music works.
Yeah, not
That's
knowing.
how performing works.
Yeah.
Not that's how knowing works.
Yeah.
Like, wow, what if this idea of going from, okay, how you know your auto mechanic is the same way of how you can know God. Well, then for me, I was able to kind of translate that, like how I know how to sing this song, or how I know this sonata, or how I know that. What if knowing God is like that? And so just that opening up, sort of allowing me to integrate my own experience.
Oh, that's good. That's a good word.
With how I thought about knowing in all of what knowing is.
Yeah.
Not just acquiring a musical skill. And so that was so profound to me, because at that moment in my life, I was really deciding to pursue a career in academia.
Yeah, and say something about which academia you have pursued.
Yes. So
because
I
it
went on to
relates.
study, right, Hebrew Bible and early Judaism. So the Old Testament. And for me at that time, it felt like this incredibly dramatic personal shift, because in many ways it was. But I had been coming out of the world of performing arts in this sort of seminary transition, intense years of growth, and then moving on to academia. And I think this way of understanding knowing helped this not seem such as dramatic as maybe it felt. I think it helped me move forward as a knower, someone longing to know, realizing it wasn't going to be so different.
That's fantastic.
If that makes
I
sense.
hearing you say this.
So.
And then, you were involved in teaching Hebrew?
Yes.
Hebrew
yes.
Performatively.
Yes. Well, that's what, so after, I think it was the next year after reading Longing to Know, having apologetics, the following year I was teaching biblical Hebrew for the first time. And this totally shaped me as a teacher from the beginning, realizing what I was asking my students to do, was asking them to submit to a process, the uncomfortable process of integrating, especially with language. It's so easy to see each step of the process with language. The whole point is to be able to read or to speak or encounter things far beyond words, but you have to learn the words. And even before that, you have to learn the letters. And, so you're asking them to become children again as they learn this language. And, but yes, and again, the idea of the body being a part, us being embodied as we know, even shaped how I taught Hebrew. We were doing paradigms. I made them move as much as possible. And, because even now, I think
Hebrew.
because it's that we have to, and I'm sure some of them hated it. But embodying, recognizing that it takes all of us, our whole selves to learn. And, our youngest isn't 2 yet, and she's in the incredible phase of language acquisition that's just mind-boggling. And there is so much gesturing that happens with this child as she uses her whole body to communicate. And which is just to say children are really good at longing.
Subsidiary focal integration.
Right. And we have to get back into that ourselves as grown-ups. But yes, it totally shaped me as a teacher, and also humbly, it's so humbling as a teacher, the job of authoritative guide.
Yeah.
It's my job to provide clues, help you see the clues, invite you into a process where you're going to have to move forward before you understand it all.
Yeah.
You're
saying all the right things.
So it definitely shaped me as a teacher. Right away. And that's what was so fascinating is, read this book, had this class, graduated. 2 months later, I'm in the classroom on the other side. And yes, I think so. It shaped my understanding of what is supposed to happen in the classroom.
That's so neat. That's great. Yeah, by the way, this is an aside. So do you know the name of Charlotte Mason?
Yes.
Because I participated in a monograph that's coming out this year in honor of the centenary, connecting her work with covenant epistemology.
Oh, how fascinating.
Just saying.
Oh, yes. No, that's totally interesting. Yeah, I last year at some point read a book, and now I don't remember who wrote it or what it was called, but a short little book on Charlotte Mason's idea of narrative, of using narrative as how the child learns by retelling the story. But saying like, okay, how can we use that idea of narration, having the child narrate for all sorts of subjects, even if it's math, but again, the idea of the child participating. That's totally fascinating.
Yeah, so actually, I talk about narrative right toward the end of it. I'm going to have to connect you with that.
Yes, that's so fascinating.
Oh, my goodness. So, Pauline, now, in God's kindness, you have gotten yourself to a PhD, and you're looking at a position at, you have the position at United Seminary in Dayton, and it's been fewer than 20 years out, but Longing to Know is now 20 years out. So I'm wondering if you would, I know I put you up to this, but do you have any sort of estimate to share of the value of Longing to Know in, moving forward from 20 years out?
Yes, well, I think I can't help but imagine that the kind of experience I had reading it, in the sense of, this is how I have had these incredibly significant encounters with reality in my life. This makes so much sense. In some ways, it has this, I think the way that you use the metaphor of the auto mechanic speaking in real language to real people, I feel like it has the potential to connect with with what people really live and experience already.
Nice.
And it's saying, okay, now let's take that and apply that to how you know all things, how you know God, how you know, and so I think people have and will continue to have that experience of, oh, that makes so much sense. I've just compartmentalized that experience somehow. But also specifically, we think of, I can't help but think in the age of social media, where we become passive knowers. I feel like flooded with information or non-information, but sort of a passive posture as we think about knowing, a disembodied one, as we don't interact personally as much. I feel like
it's the defective metaphor,
Yes. And so I think sort of reminding us that that knowing is an active, something we have to actively participate in, and that it's an experience. Again, it's not the nugget, it's the experience, and it's personal. It's always personal, which doesn't mean relative truth. Everyone can have their own truth, which is something I think that's so profound in the book. No, but it is still personal, because knowing is lived by people, by individuals, and with individuals. And so I think connecting us back to knowing being personal, interpersonal, and fully embodied is so important, and will continue to be important as our we just think of what's happened in the last 20 years since your book has been published. It's mind-boggling. And so I think that message is still very much important. And again, I think will ring so true. Because again, as a young mother, with 3 young children, that is the human experience. You watch children learn and grow, and they're subsidiary focal integration, fully embodied, everything is personal. And so I think it rings true to the human experience, and also shines a light on sort of our defective way of knowing about knowing, thinking we know about knowing.
Well, for it, 11 years out, to hear you put together how Longing to Know eased your transition from music through philosophy to Hebrew Bible, that is just so beautiful. I'm not sure that you would have been able to say it in 2 sentences back at the time.
No.
So I'm glad we're having this interview now, so you can do it.
Me too.
And I can't tell you how good it is to see you after all this time. I'm so proud of you.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yes.
Looking forward to seeing more of you in the future.
Yes, definitely. We will be in the same state, which is exciting.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for helping me celebrate Longing to Know.
Happy birthday to Longing to Know.